We've structured today's conversation in a very free-flowing format. So please keep your questions coming in the chat window. You'll see the chat option below, and we'll be taking questions for the last 10 to 15 minutes of the 1 hour session we have today. To start off, my name is Pranav Pai. I'm the founding partner of an early stage venture capital fund in Bangalore called 314 Capital. I also am fortunate to be working with AIMA as the Vice Chairman of the Young Leaders Initiative at the institution. I'm joined today on the panel with two very distinguished panelists, Anil Srinivas, who is the Chief Digital Officer of L'Oreal India, and Swagata Sarangi, who is co-founder of Smytten, a very interesting startup based in Bangalore. Both of them are here today to talk about our panel's topic, which is digital transformation, challenges and opportunities. Of course, all of us have most likely attended many discussions and seminars on issues that go around digital transformation. Today, we'll be talking about this topic from two very different perspectives. Anil comes from a very distinguished background as the Chief Digital Officer of L'Oreal, and he'll be introducing himself in a moment. He has seen how digital transformation impacts all stacks of a large company's operations. And of course, as a co-founder of a startup, Swagata is leading some of these transformations from his perspective, working with large brands, building very new, interesting opportunities. So we're very fortunate today to hear from both of these perspectives. And we'll be going through a series of conversations on different topics that we've identified as relevant for today's conversation. To start off, Anil, it'd be great to hear from you, a quick introduction on your context, your background, and your views on this topic. Then we'll go to Swagata, and then we'll start with some of the questions we've identified for today. Over to you, Anil.
Sure. First of all, thank you to AIMA for having me at this session. It's a pleasure to be here. In terms of my introduction, so I'm the Chief Digital Officer at L'Oreal India. I've been here for a little over a year now. Prior to this, I used to work at in a couple of different categories actually. So one in fashion with Levi's immediately before this for a few years, 4 years. And then before that, we're in the IT industry with Dell, and before that with a few startups. So net about 15 years in IT, 4 in fashion, and now last year or so in beauty. So 3 very different categories, and digital transformation, is actually quite has impacted the industry and the world in quite a big way. And I think we've all seen that famous joke now, right? Which has come about, which one has driven the digital transformation most, CEO, CIO, CDO, CTO, or COVID? And we all know the answer is COVID, right? So having said that, I think our journey on, L'Oreal's journey on digital transformation started a few years back. I think our CEO, Jean-Paul Egon, had the foresight to actually see that, digital was going to change the world. So this actually started almost a decade back in 2010. And then with the arrival of our CDO in 2014, Lubomira Roche, we sort of went on this acceleration on digital transformation. And essentially, our journey has been quite interesting. We've gone through, let's say, stage 1 of digital transformation, right? So where we've looked at, our presence on e-commerce, our presence, our consumer interfaces in terms of digital marketing, our interfaces with our customers, and so on and so forth, that have taken a significant amount of, sort of leap over a period of time, right? So in that sense, we've made quite a bit of progress in that, in our, sort of recent, in fact, our, half-yearly results were just announced yesterday, and our e-commerce business grew at upwards of 60% on a year-on-year basis. So, and today, e-commerce is close to almost 20% in terms of our overall business, especially, for a business which started as predominantly as a, physical offline kind of business. We've made a tremendous, sort of a leap over the last few years. Having said that, there's a long way forward as far as L'Oreal is concerned, right? In terms of digital transformation, and then of course we're going to talk about some of these. So just pausing there for Swagat also to take on.
Thank you, Anil. Swagat, we'd love to hear from you and a brief introduction and some quick initial views on the topic.
Sure. Thanks, Pranav, and thanks, AIMA. It's a privilege to be here because this topic is actually very close to my heart. So just a quick background. So I've been running a startup for almost like 4.5 years now. So started this venture called Smytten around early 2016. And the whole idea of Smytten is how do we help new age consumer brands across categories? We are a very category agnostic platform to interact with the new age consumers in this digital world. So while we believe that a lot has happened in the digital space over the last decade in India, we believe we're just scratching the surface in terms of delivering a digital experience end to end to the consumer. And there is a gap on both supply side and the demand side. And a lot of technologies, of course, new technologies are going to come in and fill in this gap, but the fundamentals yet have to be fixed in India, I guess. So before starting Smytten, I used to be with Google India, and I was with Google for almost half a decade in a very interesting phase. So this was 2010 to 15, where actually the whole digital ecosystem was being built in India. So all the e-commerce companies were small, getting their Series A, B funding. There were not too many apps. And I remember we used to go to companies and kind of nudge them to get their mobile assets right. Many companies didn't even have a mobile responsive website, and nobody kind of cared about how this digital ecosystem is going to pan out. From that, and again, was involved with a lot of interesting large scale initiatives on behalf of Google. Starting with how do we build the whole e-commerce ecosystem? So I was fortunate enough to run and launch a program called Great Online Shopping Festival. So this was pre-Big Billion Day era or a Great Indian Shopping Festival by Amazon. So we try to kind of build in the whole internet commerce ecosystem by doing these large scale programs. And then I remember we launched a program called Get India Business Online, and we realized SMBs are the backbone of India and the 50 million SMBs in the country, but again, very, very poor in their whole digital journey. So we kind of launched this program to get them free website and a lot of tools so that they can at least start their digital journey. So again, a lot of programs helping women get online, which is again, we realized the penetration of Indian women into internet, the adoption was a lot slower than actually the men population. So it was an interesting journey, and I'm glad that when 5 years later, when I'm kind of looking back, none of these programs need to exist anymore. I think they delivered what they were supposed to deliver. But at the same time, there are a lot of new interesting challenges that have come, right? As the technology world progresses, there's new challenges that's always going to kind of come up. And I think it'll be interesting to discuss during the course of this session in terms of how we can get ready for the next decade.
Thank you, Swagata. Wonderful introduction. Let's move on to our first question, and this is for both panelists. I'll ask Anil first. Now, Anil, as CDO of L'Oreal India, you have witnessed L'Oreal going from a very large offline presence, as you yourself said, to now today 60% growth in e-commerce, like you mentioned. 20% of your revenues are from digital. That's fantastic progress. Very good news to hear. And I hear these kind of stories from dozens of companies in India every month. And digital is becoming more and more important, as we're seeing in the news. So can you talk to us from your vantage point, from your peer set of CDOs, CIOs, CTOs, how do operators of large companies look at the Indian ecosystem and look at digital as a strong part of their strategies and their partnerships going forward? Anil? We think we seem to have lost Anil Rajni. If you can reach out to him, I'll just move on to Swagat. Swagata, similar question for you. You, of course, thank you for giving us your background with Google. Google has played a foundational role in almost every market it's gone into. And as you can see today, it's maybe a little too important, as we saw in the news yesterday. But all jokes aside, you have, of course, been part of the transformation. You've helped young companies, old companies, mature companies, large companies. Everyone is now playing a role in digital today. Talk to us from your standpoint. How do you view the Indian ecosystem, and how are you thinking about digital as part of your strategies and your partnerships?
Yeah. So, Pranav, taking the first part on the digital ecosystem, right? And let me just kind of take you a few years back and kind of see how the journey has progressed so far. Cut back to 2011-12, right? We had 20 million smartphone users in this country. And today we are talking about almost touching 500 million smartphone users. The internet penetration, I remember we used to talk about 20 million, 30 million, 50 million people being on the internet. And we are now almost, with Geo coming in, we're almost talking about the whole India being online. I mean, we're already close to 500 million people. So of course, a lot of things have progressed a lot faster because the infrastructure was built in a lot sooner than we had anticipated. And I remember in one of the researches, we were projecting that by 2015, we will have 100 million smartphone users back in 2011, right? But that happened a lot sooner. That happened in 2013. The reason being, again, a lot of smartphone makers came in and they started producing sub 5K, sub 10K kind of handsets. That kind of propelled the whole acceleration, right? So if you see in last 10 years, every estimate of every research company, every analyst has been beaten in terms of how this curve is progressing. And that's a very interesting fact because in India, I think we have skipped a generation of the whole evolution in terms of technology, internet, call it whatever, anything related to technology for that matter. So now the question is what's going to happen next, right? So what are we going to skip? Are we going to fall in line with the world and kind of follow the same curve? Are we getting into kind of more closer to how a mature market would kind of behave? So those are the questions. In my sense, India with this, especially post-COVID, is going to look like a very different world. The reason being 2-3 data points I'm just going to talk about. While we talk about internet commerce in India, if you include everything, including the phone top-ups, Paytm transactions or wallet transactions and everything, there are about 100 million users who would have transacted online lifetime. And this 100 million, out of that, serious shoppers who actually kind of do regular shopping online would be 20-30% of it. This number post-COVID in another 1.5 years will see at least a 5x to 6x jump. We will have 100 million serious internet shoppers, transactors in this country. And it's not going to only going to happen in metros or this thing. It's going to kind of cut across the strata. I mean, today, even as a Smytten, when we see, because we are a kind of a premium lifestyle platform, right? So when we started, our whole hypothesis was that we will see a lot of traffic and transaction from metro. And that honestly happened for first 2-3 years. Like I'm 16, 17, 18, 75% of our transactions actually used to come from metros. Cut to post-COVID, today 65% of the transactions are actually coming from non-metros for us. So that is going to change dramatically in terms of how people are going to adapt into internet transactions. The second thing that what we are seeing is, again, and this is something we spoke at Google also at length when we were there, there are 150 million English-speaking natives or English-speaking people in the country, let's say. Beyond that, your internet has to be much more relevant with vernacular. And a lot of content and ecosystem has been built, but I don't think the commerce ecosystem has been evolved enough to cater to this segment yet. And again, primarily because the commerce also has been dominated by a few key players. And they're yet to start that journey in terms of being really, really serious about the vernacular. The third piece that is happening is with especially the data price kind of going down with Geo and everything and all that. There are a lot of new interesting models of transaction and avenues of transaction that's opening up for the consumer. So think of platforms like there is a video commerce, like we used to have this whole TV selling, TV shops and all those kind of things where people used to kind of go and immediately place an order on the phone. Now that whole thing has been taken online, and the reason it's been possible is because you are not having a buffering system in terms of when you're watching a video. Your data speed is decent enough. So the digital experience also is changing, and hence a lot of new business models would evolve in the next decade. So these are the three things I see is going to happen from a transformation perspective.
Yeah, and sorry, I dropped off for a bit. Just to add to what Swagata is saying, I think a couple of other points that I'd like to add is, basically, I think we've seen a significant change in the consumption media consumption behavior, right? In terms of consumers, right? People are spending a significant amount of time on digital channels, consuming TV, OTT. I think numbers are, records are being broken as we speak. Facebook and Instagram Live. If you see, their consumption has grown, multifolds, right? In this period of time in terms of live streaming, etc. So there's a fundamental change in consumer behavior. The question that we need to obviously understand and ask is this permanent or is this only a temporary phase, right? Before that. The other thing, in terms of business models, which Swagat mentioned, really interesting. Who could imagine that, we'd use Zomato and Swiggy to deliver, normal products, right? But, necessity leads to invention really there, right? So in that sense, business models, the way hyper-local is coming, right? And for example, in our business, we've seen that our salon partners, and considering, that for a period of time, because of the lockdown, pretty much all retail activity was closed, right? But consumers, still need some of these products, right? In terms of, whether they need to wash their hair for their hair care or for other things, right? So they would reach out to the salons, and our salons figured out a way to, deliver this in a hyper-local way, right? And we helped build a, sort of a platform with our salon partners to enable that. And, what we've seen is some fantastic results from that, right? So in terms of hyper-local delivery, or, you can call it by whatever name, but at the end of the day, it's about making sure, the product reaches the consumer. So in terms of business models, and then the third thing is really the significant impact it's had on supply chain, right? There was this another joke, I'm not sure, that was trending, which was on Twitter and LinkedIn, which is the need or the importance of supply chain became number one, right? Over things like essentials like coffee or whatever, right? So supply chain became suddenly a critical, a crucial, sort of capability for most organizations, and where companies were able to recover the supply chains faster. They've seen a big sort of jump as far as their business is concerned. And from our perspective, again, there was a significant amount of obviously let's say constraints, right, in terms of local, because the rules kept on changing during the lockdown, etc. But our priorities, absolutely were to make sure that once our employees were safe and sort of taken care of, we sort of picked up our opened our factories as well as our distribution centers, right, across the country, so that we are able to sort of fulfill customer demand as it comes from. So in a nutshell, three things, right? So changing consumer media consumption behavior, of course, new models of commerce, a lot becoming hyper local, and then the third one is supply chain and agility in supply chain being a key sort of influencer or determinant of business success.
Excellent. Thank you, Anil. Thank you, Swagata. That's a very good introduction. Just building on top of what you said, and I'll start with Swagata first. Now, Swagata, you sell primarily to businesses. You help them in their digitization. You help them in their reach out. Now, as a business that sells to another business, talk to our audience about some of the new things you've seen businesses evolve in their thinking about how they buy technology, how they use technology, the questions they're asking you in 2020 compared to the questions they were asking you at Google in 2011, like you said. So how much has changed from the business procurement standpoint? And what are some of the insights you can share with our audience members today?
Yeah. See, I think one of the fundamental shifts we have seen, Pranav, is at least people are actively seeking for data. So previously, like, I mean, in an offline world, you would kind of rely on a distributor, and then you will probably kind of do some shop audits and go to shop once or twice and try to figure out what's happening, what's not happening, right? And with digital, at least everyone has been very aware that they can have access to enormous amount of data, which can help them take a lot of decisions. While that realization is there, what we have also realized is not many people today understand how to harness that data. So that's a journey I think people are going through, and it's a learning phase. Some are a little advanced, some are a little behind, some have burned their fingers, because also what is happening is there is a parallel ecosystem which is being built to help these brands, and they come in with like a lot of promises. Some are delivered, some are not delivered. So that's a consistent theme we are seeing with this platforms or brands. The second thing also, which is little ironical, is see, at the end of the day, as a brand, if you're selling a product to a consumer, you have to understand the consumer is the same, whether he or she is walking into a supermarket or a kind of a local kirana, or looking something in the digital space, right? The purchase decision journey is not going to change dramatically for the consumer unless and until there is a complete psychological or a behavioral shift that has happened. So if you were doing something in the physical space and it was kind of working for you, you also have to understand the consumer will behave the same way in terms of picking up your product. Like, for example, P&G popularized this whole concept, right? Like the 7-second, the moment of truth. I mean, it's the first 7 seconds the consumer decides. Not many people even realize that it's the same way the consumer would decide whether he or she wants to click on your ad or want to even spend time on your website beyond the initial opening. People don't also realize that if your website opening is delayed by more than 2 seconds, you actually have a 30% drop-off rate. And 1 second, every 1 second increases your drop-off by another 30%. So while everyone is kind of making website and kind of trying to beautify it and all that, I think a lot of these nuances and understanding is still missing in the ecosystem. And similarly, the third thing is, like, you would fret over a TV ad or creating a kind of a beautiful video or kind of writing the copy for a print ad, and you will probably hire a creative agency who would do that one-liner catchphrase for you. But what people are also missing out is print just gives you one opportunity in the morning to get exposure. In digital, you're getting at least 20 opportunities during the day to get that same eyeball from the consumer. So you have an opportunity, but many a times it's just the run-of-the-mill same banner, and then the same things. People just don't spend time, making a good creative on the digital side of it. I mean, if you are not communicating well enough, how are you expecting the user to take an action? I think that realization is still kind of missing. The third good part, what we are seeing also is now everyone has understood that, I cannot avoid this journey. So gone are those days where I will just rely on a distributor and I'll go and crack like 5 regional distribution deals and I'm done with it. So hence, if you see, when we talk to a lot of brands, everyone is talking about directly going to the consumer, D2C. D2C is the catchphrase, whether it is a small startup or whether it is Anil is laughing. I'm sure you would have heard this in board meeting many a times. And we are also hearing when we work with larger brands, right? Like, how do we go to the consumer and service the consumer directly? And I think, and Anil can kind of give a better perspective on this. And what we are seeing from being as an outsider is there is a lot of push and pull internally for large organizations. I mean, see, so far, they felt that distribution essentially has to be taken care by the channel. Our job is to essentially create demand. Our job is to create amazing products that work. Our strength is R&D, our strength is production, our strength is marketing and communication. The distribution channel has to take care of its own through a third-party self-service mode kind of a thing. Now, when you start thinking directly interacting with the consumer, you're putting your brand out there and exposing your brand in 20 different ways, which was previously not existing. Because the consumer today can immediately retaliate on your brand. I mean, imagine you're buying a shampoo on a shelf, and let's say you found an expiry product on the shelf. So you would not immediately kind of come and kind of retaliate or kind of lash out at the brand. You will go to the counter, you will say that, hey, why are you keeping expiry products? So your brand, I think your brand imagery was still a lot protected in a offline world, and in an online world, you're overexposed. And how do you kind of manage those dynamics in dealing with the demands of this new age consumer? And that's a journey I think both smaller brands and the larger brands have to go through.
Understood. Thank you, Swagata. Very good perspective. Anil, now from your side, of course, L'Oreal is one of the world's most prominent brands. I don't have to tell you that your ads are amongst the best performing ones every year. You win the awards. It's a fantastic journey as a company. But now today on digital, there are so many ways consumers can leave feedback. If they don't like your ad, they'll leave a nasty comment on YouTube. If they love your ad, it goes viral on Twitter within 2 hours. So today, the digital native consumer base is something that most large companies are dealing with very differently, right? So from your perspective, talk to us about some of the things you are doing to build relationships with your customers and to make sure that L'Oreal continues its strength in a digitally native environment.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, you absolutely rightly said. We are a 110-year-old company, started by a chemist, right? So it's all started with a hair color product 110 years back. So, I mean, and over a period of time, we've grown to be the #1 beauty company in the world, right? So obviously it's come through a lot of hard work in terms of how we, engage with customers, providing, really being close to our consumers, and then understanding their feedback and sort of addressing that at different points in time, right? So so showing agility in that is going to be is extremely important, right? And obviously with digital now being a major or a big communication tool, right? If not the biggest from a consumer perspective, things have obviously meant that we need to evolve the way in which we're collecting feedback, right? So from consumers and how we engage with them in terms of conversations, right? I'll share a couple of examples, right? So a couple of years back, we acquired this company called Modiface. Modiface is essentially an augmented reality. They're one of the leaders in artificial intelligence-based, sort of augmented reality, right? So what's a beauty company which sells, makeup, skincare, and other cosmetics, etc., doing and acquiring, a tech startup? Well, really, we saw that that's a core capability as far as an organization like ours is concerned. Especially important because as consumers go to digital mediums, right? Media, essentially, what's going to happen is that the way, I mean, you can't be everywhere and try on physically, a product, right? Like a makeup, or a lipstick, or which color of this particular hair color would you like, and so on and so forth. So for us, that was a critical capability that we realized, and in that we've sort of invested in it over a period of time. And what we've done now is that, especially important in today's context, right? So we've activated this augmented reality where consumers can actually check a particular product, what shade, what color, whether it's foundation or whether it's hair color, and so on and so forth, on our websites, right? Like Maybelline, Garnier, L'Oreal Paris, etc., and including our e-commerce partners like Nykaa. And the intent really here is that any consumer would be really avoiding a sort of a physical tester. So one of the first things that we did when the pandemic struck was remove the testers and really start working on accelerating these, especially in India, right? So that's one way, right? In terms of how sort of things are changing. The second way is really around and again I'm not saying it's because of pandemic, but the way things are going viral, or the way things are the world is seamlessly connected, means that Black Lives Matter, for example, which is a sort of a movement from the US, has now spread across the world, right? And imagine how much of an impact that particular movements had across the world, where companies have heard consumers' feedback on on social media. Consumers have I mean, there isn't an organization or a government diktat really here. It's basically the voice of consumer, right? And we made a few weeks back we also took the stance that we need to sort of change the names of some of our products, and to make sure that we are respecting the voice of the consumer, right? And well, this voice comes from social media, and social media is virtual, and so we've built that capability to listen over a period of time, right? And make sure that we are hearing we're picking up, we're responding to consumers online, whether they reach out to us through a phone call or an email or or a virtual medium like a WhatsApp or social media. We're building to the capability to listen and then respond in an appropriate way and address the concern, right? Just a couple of perspectives in terms of how, this is transforming the way we look at consumer interactions.
Fantastic. Thank you, Anil. Now, moving on to the second part of this topic, of course, the challenges. Now, as we've discussed before and everyone's seen in the news, there are a dozen and more challenges every week coming out from the digital sphere, whether it's cybersecurity, whether it's data privacy, whether it's threats of surveillance, whether it's big versus small, and the question of monopolies. There seems to be a new challenge every day. So I'll go to Swagat first. Swagat, if you can talk to us about one particular interesting theme where you might have some fantastic insight. Let's talk about data privacy and data security. Now, through your time in Google, and of course now as a custodian of strategies for your clients, data would have, like you mentioned before, become one of the most important currencies you deal with. So talk to us about some of the things, some of the principles you keep in mind, and our audience members might benefit learning about as they think about their digital strategies and what they should be mindful of as they build presence online.
Yeah. Pranav, I mean, glad that you brought this topic up, right? And it's very close to my heart again, the second topic, because at Google, I mean, we battled this issue, and especially we're still battling, like especially, I mean, you would have heard all the news, right? So let me not kind of get in there, and be it Europe, be it US Congress, and every day there is like kind of heightened awareness about how this data is being dealt with. Is it being dealt with responsibly? And is the user data protected enough globally? I mean, this is not for a small company or a large company matter, for everyone. But also what is happening in India as everyone is kind of getting into this digital journey, as I said, there is a learning curve everyone is going through. And in the learning curve, what kind of gets pushed towards the end in the pecking order is your data security. And how many times, I mean, just to give you a statistics, last year in 2019, there were about 7,000 reported data breaches in globally. And unreported, I'm sure a lot of companies would not come out and open and be honest about it. So it is a reality. And it is another pandemic, honestly, I would say, which is just waiting to explode. And unless and until we do something about it, it'll just hit on our face. So let's take what small companies, I mean, you have to kind of start with baby steps, right? Like, for example, when you are kind of hosting your web server, you kind of pick out whichever platform you're kind of picking out, right? Be it Amazon, be it Microsoft, be it like Azure Cloud, anywhere. The basic thing you need to activate is a kind of a two-factor authentication, limited IP-based access to your mainframe server. And I don't know how many companies, many startups till date miss this basic fact. Your domain has to be kind of protected with a two-factor authentication. It takes 2 clicks for you to activate that, but many people, 99% of the people miss out on that. Second is, right, like when we're kind of, everything is kind of being hosted in the cloud and all that. And you have a responsibility to the users who have trusted you with their data, whatever it is, right? To email, phone number and all that. So there is something called a virtual cloud, which you can create, and you can create another wall around your existing mainframe server. So I think a lot of education and awareness has to kind of come in this space. And I think bigger companies like Amazon, Microsoft, they're still trying to kind of do sessions. I kind of keep getting mails from AWS every single day about they conducting some session about it. But when you log into that session, there are honestly 4 business owners. And I'm sure AWS is being used by at least 100,000 business owners in the country, and it doesn't come in the top of mind. I think there has to be a movement, like Anil was mentioning, Black Lives Matter. Your data matters, and every company has to feel responsible for the user data. So, I mean, I'll leave with this thought, because I can get into the details and specifics of how you should protect your data with like doing very basic 5-10 things and all that. I would be happy to take questions if anyone has around it, because we have been through that journey ourselves. And trust me, one point in time, I mean, as a startup, you're always, I mean, you have kind of jumped off the cliff and you're building the parachute, right? As you're landing. And there is always lack of resource and there is always lack of time. But there was a point in time when I took a call and I said nothing doing, because there are always like asks coming from different businesses. Things are just falling apart, right? I mean, as we're growing, there is a WMS system needs to be put in place. There are 5 different integrations that has to happen to the product, and you have a limited product bandwidth because you're not a kind of a team which is sitting with like 200 product managers and 1,000 engineers. And now in this, how do you prioritize, right? One point in time, I took a call. I said that 15 days, nothing doing. If you have to shut the business, we will shut the business. But this has to happen. Give the product team the bandwidth to do this. Otherwise, this will never end. So sometimes you just have to take those hard calls. And trust me, nothing fell apart. We sailed through those 15 days doing business as usual. It's just that mindset you have to prioritize it over anything else.
Yeah, and just to add to that, I think the whole, I mean, in terms of data security and privacy, absolutely. I think Swagat sort of hit the nail on the head. I mean, I think it's number one priority now, pretty much across the organizations, right? I mean, and especially in the way, we work with our IT partners as well, right? So 2 things there, right? I think one, we've all heard about the recent ransomware attacks, which have crippled a lot of, organizations abroad and has had a tremendous, sort of impact on organizations, right? And their continuity of business. So I think it becomes extremely important that, when we're building any new capability, whether it's in terms of architecture or in terms of understanding the various interfaces, absolutely, I think data security is paramount, right? So as I was sharing, the example of where we built this little app, to work with our salon partners and enable sort of hyperlocal, deliveries, right? So in that, we actually, took the call that, okay, so we're not going to go, and fly by the seat of our pants, but really, we are going to spend that extra bit of time and working with our, IT security team to make sure that everything there is sort of A to Z is taken care of from a security perspective, right? The second part really comes around privacy. I think, and over a period of time, I think this has become a big concern for consumers, right? So, of course, data is a critical asset for any organization, and as sort of massive data, processing systems, take into shape and are become commonplace now. Companies are using that to build and understand, get better insights, etc. But at the end of the day, I think where the ball, sort of, or where the rubber hits the road, essentially is where how you're dealing with an individual consumer's data, right? So, for example, in our case, in our organization, we've obviously got, data regulation, security, privacy, and all that. But I think it all sort of boils down to 2 questions, right? First, is this data really important for us to, from a business perspective? And more importantly, are we seeking consent for that, right, from consumer? And does the consumer know what consent what their data will be used for? And it becomes extremely important. So we follow 2 sets of guidelines always, right? So we all know that GDPR is, the one of the world's toughest guidelines as far as data privacy is concerned. So we follow that, as well as the local laws as they apply. For example, our own laws in India as far as data privacy is concerned. So trying to make sure that we are ticking all the boxes as from a consumer's perspective. But I think at the end of the day, it all boils down to trust, right? I mean, it doesn't matter what regulations, what systems, and all that, we put in place, are we, keeping the trust of the consumer, and, how we are addressing a concern, if any, right? And I think that's the soft. So we have the hard aspect, which is about following the law, making sure that, we've got the necessary safeguards in place, but then the softer aspect as well, in terms of making sure we are earning that trust rather than, losing it in any other way.
Excellent. Thank you, Anil. Thank you, Swagata. So with that, we've had a fairly large number of questions. I'm very surprised to see such strong participation. So maybe we'll move some of our next topics to questions. The first question I identified, which had a lot to do with what we just spoke about. Mr. Khatri asks, while digitization has been a boon for Indian industry and e-commerce, has it, please bring your attention to the digital divide that exists in society. What do we need to do to sort out this kind of inequality and bridge the divide? And I guess this divide applies to small companies, big companies, inclusion of citizens in the internet versus those who are still don't have access, tier one versus the rest. So many areas of inequalities. We'd love to get your views, panelists, on how you see India shaping up over the next 5 years.
Yeah, I mean, just from my perspective, right? Imagine, so look at the timeline, right? So 10 years back, we didn't have, the kind of digital ecosystem that we do today, right? So if you look at it, in the last 5-7 years, our economy has transformed, right? Look at the number of startups that have come through. We are known as the third largest startup ecosystem in the world. Look at the number of consumers who have, mobile phones and who have data on their mobile phones, right? So I think we've all heard about the, about the revolution in data, how, with the entrance of, Jio, it brought the data prices down. And today, for example, there are 550 million consumers who have access to, who have smartphones and therefore, through that have access to data and internet, etc. I think, if any, the digital divide in my personal view is sort of coming down in terms of it's getting closer. I think if you look at any stat, for example, right? So the rural India internet penetration is growing in a big way, faster than urban internet penetration. Obviously, there's still a gap. Urban internet penetration's still, in high 70s, while rural is, probably a little lower. So, but it's in the number of users, number of consumers coming on internet, new consumers is growing. Number of shoppers coming on internet is growing. And when we look at digital divide, we also have to look at gender divide. It's not just the, city, urban versus rural. If you look at the number of women, who are accessing internet using their own devices has been growing, right? So India used to be like a 70-30 meaning 70% of, users were men and 30 just a few years back. Now that has become, 65-35 or 64-36. So which means that, it's leading to, more sort of, or a broader demographic, impact on the economy, right? So, and we've all heard about the e-services, etc. The other stat that I want to, sort of bring in here is that what we are seeing is that in terms of e-commerce, and with the limited data that we see, right? Obviously, the platforms get to see a lot more. But what we know of is that our, top 8 versus non-top 8 e-commerce is that, in some parts of our business is almost equal, right? So, which means that it doesn't matter. Consumers are consuming across the country, right? In terms of e-commerce as well, and they're coming on board as shoppers as well, right? I mean, I think digital. I mean, and look at payments, right? I mean, the prevalence of cash as an economy, but that's. I mean, you look at UPI as a tool, right? Just imagine, within a period of 18 to 24 months, that has crossed 1 billion transactions per month. So, which is phenomenal, right? So you can see that with all this, I believe, right? And again, from a personal perspective, that, digital is making it a level playing field for people to access information, access products, and get the experiences that they want, right? So
excellent. Thank you, Anil. Swagata, from your perspective, digital divide, India, where are we going?
I would say, there are both sides to the story. So while I completely agree with Anil that from a access perspective, information, access to data and all that divide is of course going down, and everyone is kind of trying to play their part, right? Large companies, government. Today, if you go to any panchayat, you will have at least a kind of a VSAT where they're at least encouraging people to come and kind of access internet. People at least know there is something called internet. So while that is all happening, at the same time, there is a scary side of the story also, because see, it's becoming a very powerful medium, and hence it is very easy to create a digital divide today for anyone who has access to resource, and especially given our country state in terms of education awareness, and especially we like hardly we're not such a literate country, right? So it is a little scary, to be very honest, if you ask me. Today, a large company with like a lot of resource could just roger their way through to make everyone else irrelevant in terms of not being seen at all. Or people are probably not having kind of that much of a discretion between which data is right, which data is wrong, and how do we kind of differentiate between them. And a lot of times what also many digital communications are not coming with a disclaimer. Like, this is a basic thing which we have been also kind of telling everyone, right? Like when you're putting an Instagram post, like there are a lot of these influencers and all of these people are there. And it's again, there is nothing wrong in kind of promoting or endorsing a particular product or a brand. But the least you can do is saying that it is endorsed. It is a paid endorsement, because any ad I'm watching on a TV, by nature, I know it's a paid ad. You have paid to the platform, you have paid to the celebrity to kind of do the video. It's a commercial. So the lines between a commercial and a content are very hazy in today's digital ecosystem. And that is something, if we don't take care of it, it can create more divide. And especially for small companies, it is not going to remain a kind of a level play field, because if it's an auction pricing at the end of the day, in terms of how many times I can bombard information to a user. Anil would know all this, right? You would discuss all this, your opportunity to see OTS, frequency, reach, and GRPs and stuff and all that. It's very easy to manipulate those metrics in a digital world, which is
Understood.
Not so much in a traditional media space.
Understood. Thank you, Swagata. So very good perspectives from both our panelists. Moving on to the next question from Ms. Seema Singh. With the wave of digital transformation sweeping the world, each organization is in a rush to follow the wave, it seems. What are the key points any organization should consider when they're evaluating the need for digital transformation? So very foundational question. I'm sure we can spend an hour just on this question, but very quick thoughts for the audience from both of you. What do you think are the fundamental elements of a digital transformation strategy for Indian businesses?
Yeah.
Swagata, you can go first.
Yeah. So again, as I mentioned earlier, the fundamentals of business doesn't change, right? It's just the different medium you are talking to the same consumer. I think the first question you should ask yourself is, who's my consumer, and is that consumer interacting with my brand or buying my brand in a virtual space or not? Otherwise, there is no point of doing for something just for the sake of doing it because everyone is doing. If that answer is yes, then the next level you go to that, okay, what is the kind of a experience or a communication or a interaction I would want to have with the user in this space? Because if my interaction in a physical world primarily used to be an interaction on a self space where the person would pick up the pack and read my information, is it that thing I want to deliver, or is it something beyond? And there's a beautiful opportunity for every brand today to just go beyond those transactional messages and actually deliver your ethos. Who do you, what do you stand for? Why are you doing it? What more can you deliver? So that is a real emotional connect you can build. Unless and until you are planning to leverage digital for that, again, it'll always remain a kind of a augmentation of your main strategy. It will never become core to you. The third part, when you are kind of going and building your digital infrastructure, you need to find the right set of partners, and do not hesitate if you have to spend a little bit of money initially to get the right set of partners and pay them a little more you can trust. Do not cut corners. If somebody says that, hey, I'm going to build do a coding for you, website coding for 20,000 rupees, versus one guy who you have to pay ₹1 lakh and say that, hey, I want everything with my SSL certificate, with my licenses, hosted on a secure cloud platform, with this thing, and look for those kind of pitches. People who have that orientation, otherwise people will cut corners to save money, and at the end of the day, it will come and hit you back. So I think these are the three fundamental things you need to kind of take care of when you're thinking of your digital journey.
Excellent. Thank you, Swagata. Anil, your views?
Yeah, just to add to what Swagata said, I think there are two parts to this. You've got the front end of the business, and then you've got the back end, right? So front end, as he very nicely explained, right? Where is the consumer, and how are you, sort of interacting? How is the consumer interacting with your company and with your brand, etc.? How is she, experiencing the product? Right? That becomes very important. So whether it's commerce, whether it's marketing, information, etc., becomes very important, in understanding the front end, and sort of that's the front end of business. But then there's an aspect around back end as well, right? How you're digitizing the overall back end of the organization, right? So are we able to, sort of understand and make better decisions using data, using automation, using, for example, tools like RPA, etc., right? So are we building that capability within our organizations so that not only are we, sort of satisfying the consumer's requirements, but also, bringing that product from wherever it is, whether it's in a factory or in a warehouse or wherever, to the consumer the fastest, freshest, and with the right quality, whether it's in building your product as well. And then making sure that it's done in the most efficient manner, both for the organization as well as the consumer, right? In fact, one of the examples that I'll also talk about is how you're building a product. So consumer feedback becomes very important, right? In terms of taking that feedback, and available across the different and internet, because it's an open sort of ecosystem. You're able to gather that feedback in real time and use that into building what you are iteratively improving the product as well. So you've got the front end, the back end, as well as building and creating that feedback loop within the entire ecosystem, right? Whether it's front end or back end.
Thank you, Anil. Thank you, Swagat. So at this, we have just about 4 minutes to conclude. So we'll take a quick question from the audience. Now, Anil, maybe you can take this one first. Many large companies have this mindset of doing everything internally. I'm sorry, I'm putting you on the spot. But has this changed? Have they started partnering or incubating with startups? What is it looking like from a partnership perspective? So of course, L'Oreal has done great work, but I think everyone should know how big companies' attitude has also changed. So please do share your views.
Absolutely. I think the days have gone when a company did everything from A to Z in-house. Totally gone, right? So I gave the example of Modiface. We work with partners across the world. We don't have, we are very pragmatic that we don't have the, startups across the world are doing fantastic work, right? So we work with incubators across the board, right? So we have a very strong partnership with, Founders Factory, Plug and Play, a lot of incubators, etc. And in India, we've invested in a venture fund called Fireside, right? And which basically looks at consumer products, startups which are creating products for consumers, right? And they're not a tech company per se. So for us, what we believe is that, we need to there's a lot of innovation that's happening in the startup ecosystem across the world, whether it's in products, whether it's in technology, in a lot of different areas, or even, for example, beauty. We like to call ourselves the beauty tech company, or we want to be a #1 beauty tech company. at the end of the day, we didn't create, Modiface or, the augmented reality in-house. We partner with Modiface, and then, of course, over a period of time, acquired them. So that would be the case for us, right? So everywhere, if it's an untested product or a technology, then we'll obviously, work with a startup partner, build a POC, an MVP, and then look at, how, that works. And if the partner is bringing capability, absolutely. And we're more than happy to, work with the local Indian ecosystem, right? Tech ecosystem. Extremely happy. That's actually one of my KPIs as well for, for this year.
Excellent. Thank you, Anil. Thank you so much. So Swagata, concluding remarks on large companies working with Indian startups now. You've gone from $1 trillion company to starting your own company. So I'm sure you have some views.
Yeah, see, I think we have seen a massive change in attitude over last 5 years. From a 2016-17 to 19-20, the conversations are very different. And again, I mean, we have been invited to talk to the management committee of almost every large FMCG company that's there in the country. We've been given time to kind of address the whole marketing managers and brand managers in terms of what's happening. I think there is a lot of hunger to learn from the outside of the ecosystem, which probably did not exist 5-6 years back. I mean, I'm sorry, I mean, Anil, don't take this personally, but there was a lot of pride in terms of that legacy that was built. Like, I mean, people took pride saying we are a 50-year, 100-year-old company. We know our shit. We know what we are doing. We are the king. We will rule and all that. I think that attitude has gone through a complete metamorphosis in last 3-4 years. And they're also open to, I mean, today I worked with Unilever back in 2008, 9, 10. And the kind of talent that time we used to hire versus when I go and see people on the other side of the table, there has been a lot of interesting mixed talent pool. I mean, somebody who you would not think a typical company like Unilever would hire, right? I mean, Unilever's whole hiring process has been, they will go to all these B schools, they will hire this management trainee, and then they'll put them into field for 2 years, and then they'll make them grow. I think there's a lot of lateral talent inflow that's happening across all these organizations, which is also bringing the skill set and change in the mindset and attitude. And Anil is kind of sitting at the core of it, right? I'm sure when he's kind of building his team out there, he's not looking at like, okay, the standard B school graduate worked as an ASM for 5 years and gone through a brand marketing role to a global regional brand manager role and come and do it. So I think next decade is going to be interesting. So we will see a lot of change.
Excellent. Thanks. So thank you so much, Anil, Swagata, for your time. With that, we are just 5:01. We're just 1 minute over. Thank you so much for the audience, for your time. Very grateful for your questions. I'm sorry we couldn't cover all of this. I'm sure we'll have both Swagata and Anil back for a future panel like this down the line. Thank you again, everyone. Have a good evening. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Thank you, AIMA. Thank you, Rajni and Pranav and Swagat.